here's the design I've created for this video. And so there's a couple elements that I like about it. First off, you've got a focal that is pretty small. Actually, it takes up about 1/3 of the grading. And the second element I like is this panel. And I'm not going to say it's matted, it's actually edged. So I've got 2 edges that go lengthwise, and so that gives this card a nice length. Of course, I've got the panel on the card back. And then lastly, I've got an embellishment here that can really be anything, and I can move it anywhere. So I've got some materials already put together. I'm going to start with some digital images and papers, and this comes from Hunky Dory. So let me get those materials, and then I'm going to again show you how that's layered up, and then we'll take a look at the finished good design. And here's my finished first project using this card design. And so, of course, it's going to be exactly the same because I actually use this to create the design. But let's go ahead and talk about some specifics. So I went with a 5x7 book fold. So it's a tall book fold. This panel here is about 3.5 inches, and then it looks like about 1/16 of an inch wider. So again, just adding that edging. And then I did mat the focal. Focal's 3 inches. Actually, the mat's 3 inches, and then I just trimmed this down to fit inside there and give me a really narrow edge there. And then I used a die cut here, and I know I don't like to do that for my initial ones, but this could have been any kind of embellishment that you've got in your stash. And just kind of repeated the colors. So I used this pattern for the top, and then a white shadow, and then just a dot in the center. Then finishing up on the inside, I put a strip, and I just added another couple cats, again with kind of that shadow effect. And so that's how this turned out. I went with and I'm going to stick with a craft envelope for all these makes. So let me finish some photos of these pieces, and then we're going to move into how we can make this more interesting. So the first thing I want to do is move this off center. And so I've got a topper here. So I want to stick it somewhere on this side. Probably about the same height. I like the height maybe up a little bit higher. And then I've got 2 choices really. I can leave the wide border, but let me go ahead and narrow it up, because the other change, which adds interest, is crossing some of these lines. So I've got that panel that's going to be on this side. It's narrower because I had 2 choices. I could have made this larger to go over that, but then my proportions would be off. And so I'm just going to leave it the same size and trim this down to about 2.5 inches. Then I'm going to add the rest of the elements, and then I'll be back with the better piece. So I came back with the second project alongside the initial one. So we've got all basically the same elements. I changed the pattern of the bow only because now that I have it sitting over here against this pattern, I didn't want the same pattern on pattern, even though it did have the white shadow. So, like I said, this is a good card, but really it doesn't move at all. I mean, your eye kind of goes there, you read your sentiment, and that's all there is to it. This one's got a lot more movement between this being layered up over your strip, and then also the fact that you're moving from the top left over to your bottom right. So that's how that turned out. I do like the narrow strip, and that allows me to kind of play more with the mat, because this can be anything and then this can be anything. And so whereas instead of having to fit something into my panel, I have a lot more versatility with this design. And then lastly, this whole thing could have been over here with the bow on this side, but pay attention to your images. So I've got a cat. Well, first off, this guy's looking straight at you, so it's not going to matter. This one's looking off to the right, so you really don't want him sitting here looking off your card. And that's just a real subtle kind of design tip. And then on the inside, I just have a strip, and this time I use the bow that I cut that I didn't use on front, because I do like to use my leftovers. So let me take photos of these two together and the inside of that, and then we're going to move on to the next little bit of tweaking. So the last piece of the trio, so this is the best piece. I wanted to add something, and so I went back to my first sketch, and what I like most about it is, of course, the length. And so I decided if I'm going to embellish this further, what I do is add additional vertical stripe or stripes. And so I decided to come in with a couple, actually this is a frame die cut, so I use the long sides for the bottom and the short sides. So frames make good edging, and edging makes good frames, by the way, so dies for multiple purposes. The other thing I did is, since I've got these 4 layers, I mixed it up a little bit. So I started with my back edging, and then I put my back mat for the focal, then I put the pattern paper, and then I put this. So when I take that photo, take a look at that, because it is kind of an interesting twist. And lastly, it's got a double mat. It didn't need to. I printed this out on paper and ended up raising it up, so I don't want to, it was too thin to be raised up on foam squares. And lastly, the reason I chose this frosted kind of paper, this is actually a mint green, and then I've got a frosted white, it's because I wanted to put a pearl on here, and I wanted to be comfortable on my card. So that's how this finished piece turned out. On the inside, finished it out like the second card. And that's what I have for you for the initial trio. So this is the best, that was better, and this is good. And if you're wondering, why don't you just give me a sketch of this and let me duplicate it? Well, first off, I never intend to exactly duplicate what I'm doing here. And so let me leave photos of that, and then we're going to talk about that a bit. So what these tutorials are kind of intended to do, well, first off, I made this first card. I did replace that bow, just in case you think you're going crazy. I didn't like the other one, so I put in a smaller dot in the middle and did change to that pattern. But what I'm trying to say is that maybe you like this. Maybe you like symmetrical. It's not necessary for you to create movement. And, you know, as far as the stripes and additional vertical edges, I mean, that's entirely up to you. If maybe this was an image that was more kitty-like, so it was something fun. Maybe you've got punches, specialty punches. So you go take the good suggestion that I made from this video and apply it to this one. I think punch corners would look good on that, and also playful. Then the best thing on here was a bunch of embellishments, and so maybe you could scatter some embellishments as well. So like I said, I don't know what's in your stash, and I don't know the reason that you're making the card, and so the things that you like, which was why I spent time talking about it, may not be the ones that I like. And then the other thing is you're shopping for sketches. Let me make sure that's in focus. You may come across something like this. You say, well, gosh, that's a center sort of card design. And so what I did is I applied the same better best techniques to create this card. So first thing, I've got, I use dazzles for my focal, and so I've got 2 pieces, just like in the sketch, and I shifted it over. So I've got the film strip that's backed by a paper, and then for additional vertical stripes, I wanted to bring in some blue. And so that's how this turned out, using, again, the same good, better, best principles. And then another image I have here, this is actually a finished card that came out of a magazine. Yeah, so if you've been watching me for a while, I wouldn't even present this as a good sketch, because first off, that just wants to move this way just by the way it's cut. If you're going to leave it in the center, by all means do a symmetrical bottom edge on this tag portion. What I liked about it was that this backing paper is exactly the same as the tag. And of course it's got that focal that's centered in there, so I could do the same thing by moving my focal out. And of course, you know I don't like that stripe. But having said that, it's kind of a center-focused card design, and so I've done the same things again. So first off, moving it off, because I cut this edge this way, and this card is that way, I would have moved it this way. And this one, I'm going to move over to the left. I'm going to add another vertical line by using the ribbon that I've used for the bow here. And then I want to make this cut feel a little more at home, so I just tilted the focal at the same angle. And then just to anchor it so it doesn't want to lean this way, added some pearls. Okay, I just got a quick photo of these 2 pieces, and then we're going to move into playtime. So we're going to go back to our good design and see what other materials and what other kind of cards we can make. For my first play piece, what I wanted to do is kind of piece together my own focal. So instead of already having an image made out for me, I know this design is going to work. I know it's going to be cohesive. And so I just did some dazzles, and those are stickers. I backed them on some pattern papers, and I created it within my square. And so I've got a couple elements kind of moving off my square, because I like that in my little tangent that I went on. And then on the inside, I've got my strip. You know what? I was going to add another solid color, but I thought that would take away from the gold. And then as far as finishes go, well, since this is, actually it's kind of a weird finish. It's gold with silver on the outside. These thin lines, because I wanted to add more vertical lines, and I added 4 of them. So I've got 2 on the strip, on the outside of the strip, and I've got 2 on the outside of the panel. And then for my embellishment, I just went with this piece. Now again, kind of subtle. This piece, I was talking about the cats moving out this way because this guy's looking to the inside. Well, I moved this one out onto this side because that guy's looking in. And so when I added this embellishment, he's looking into the card also. And then this is how I finished it out. And of course, since I've got these pattern papers, I'm going to do an envelope with a decorated flap. And that's how that turned out. I'm going to leave pictures of this, and then we go straight into play piece number 2. For the second play piece, what I want to do is take the design and turn it around. So I've got a wide tentfold in this case. And if you were to take this and turn it on its side, it's going to be this way. Now, I would never, ever put all the weight on the top. And so, first thing I did was when I did my panel, I knew it was going to be at the bottom. The second thing is, let's mess with that panel. So, first off, it's a pretty narrow panel that I edged on the bottom. And that's just going to kind of go with the scene. And then for my edging, top and bottom, I did the same thing. So I've got a straight, it is solid cardstock, again, edged at the bottom. And then for my additional, in this case, horizontal layer, because that's the direction we're going, I added one more of this pattern paper and put it here. And then for my focal, it does go the length or the width of my card, and that's okay. And then I put the sentiment here. Now, could you add another strip here? You could, but you kind of break up the sky, so I wouldn't do that. And then on the inside, I've just got the leftovers. So when I cut these edges out, this is what I came up with. So I've kind of got the illusion of waves. I want to talk about this a little bit because I've been talking about different things you can do with your cutting dies. This is actually a decoupage element. So again, this is kind of a digital focal, and then I just printed 2 of them so I can get this out. When I used my cutting die, it came out like this, and I have this white border. I don't know that you can see it. Maybe you can if I move my finger out of the way. And that's the way this cuts. So once that cut, what I did is I took this image back through and trimmed it to the size I want because I really needed this stitching. And I don't have a die this perfect proportion that I can use for that. And once I did that, I first cut my gray out of this, and then you can see where I came around and cut it like this. And like I said, that's again kind of just interesting ways to use cutting dies. Okay, I'm already moved on to play piece number 3, and this is 4.5 by 7. So this is kind of a longer, a narrower card. So for my third play piece, this is what I've come up with, and I don't usually go into square cards because you're a square person or you're a rectangular person, but this was really interesting. Well, first off, this comes from a paper pad from Paper Boutique, and what it's got toppers and it's got lots of pattern papers. And I'm hoping what you saw with that first sample was that if you've got a pattern paper pack, this design works for you. So I've used a couple of the papers, and I've used a topper. Now this size card is 6 by 6, but could easily have been a 7 by 5 inch card also as a tenfold. But what I'm noticing also which I didn't realize that I liked, but I guess I like, is that I've got a rectangular card with a square topper. This one, I've got a rectangular topper with a square card. So let's talk about the detail. So I've got my backing panel, I've got my strip, and as it happens, the design worked out perfect. So I've got my yak looking guy, topper, looking at my gnome over here. I did layer up again in the different patterns, so edging, then back panel for my topper, and then another piece of pattern on top of that, and then finally my topper. And lastly, just added a bow, and for my additional, in this case, horizontal line, I just used another piece of pattern paper. So that worked out really well. And on the inside, I've got this, and I saw where someone on TV had put a gnome kind of just looking forward with his beer hanging over. So I repeated the strips upside down and added him on the inside. And since I liked it, well, let's talk about this. So I did, of course, coordinating envelope. This is a purchase card blank, and it's promoted as 6x6, but be careful, because this is not 6x6. It's short of that. So that worked out. But you know what? I've got so many of these toppers and so many of these pattern papers that I just made a duplicate. So I love the design. I knew I'd have a guy sticking out here. I paid attention to the pattern a little more, so if you notice, this one is kind of eked a little bit over that way, so that I have these borders and then my pig on my chill out card. And on the inside, I just fussy cut a whole gnome. And of course, he's got his envelope also. Okay, for my last piece, I've got a note card that is stamped, because that's another thing that I haven't done before with any of my designs. So I'll leave photos of that, and I'll be back. Okay, my last play piece is this, and it's a note card. So this is a 5.5 by 4.25. And I don't always take to a stamping piece, because like in these other two designs, the things I suggested along the way really don't work for stamp, but this one does. So it's a basic layout. I used ink to add my additional stripes. So I've got kind of this green edging that only goes up and down. And then on this panel, this is actually this cardstock that is edged in brown. So if you're going to use ink, let's stick with ink. The other thing, I moved, actually this is the same card design. Let's see if I can flip it. It's this way. Because, I don't know, I can have cats sitting in there, but I couldn't have this heavy oak tree up in the top corner. So I just did that. It's a stamp. Spruced it a little bit, added a little bit of highlights, and then have a stamp for my embellishment, or in this case, a sentiment. And on the inside, of course, if I'm going to stamp, I'm always going to do a little bit more than I need, and this way someone can write into it. So anyway, that's what I have for this card design. I don't have the promo piece for the next one, but it's going to do something with dividing up this back panel. So I'm thinking corners is coming next. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed and took something with you that you can use in your own card making, and watch for the next Good, Better, Best video. Thank you. Bye.